Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, the regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining us this afternoon, we have Brian Francetich, president and partner of Golsan Scruggs, as well as Judd Mackrill, co-founder of Milemarker. We're here to discuss tech and data governance for the registered investment advisor community. It is great to have the both of you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks. Brian, I'm going to kick it off with you. It's interesting. You don't typically think of data governance and cyber threats within the IRA context. What's changed now that they need to be focused on this?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's so much a change in, there are new GDPR, the standards and different things, right? But really, when RIAs are thinking about these kinds of things, really focusing in on where they're storing private information, how many different places or locations that information is stored, and realizing for a lot of our clients, the a challenge being not so much even just where they're storing things, but what information may be sent to them from clients, and that being one of the most difficult things for them to control. Because yeah, you can have everything in nice buckets, and then a client sends you stuff with private information and comes into emails and staff emails, and so the handling of all of that we see as really critical when we have to actually end up on the back end dealing with a breach, or whether it be a regulatory matter or something like that. So definitely data governance is low down my list as far as on the my level of expertise. I know that's something that Judd and his team would dig into a lot more so, but we're more so the practical. When we have a breach, when we have an issue, how do we deal with it, right? And so limiting that amount of information that we have, and so that the mess is less to clean up, is really an important component for RIAs out there.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a perfect setup for us to get into Judd here, because response plans are critical as much as investment planning is. And Judd, a big part of this is that data really is a commodity these days, and that is part of transforming the wealth management experience as a client and as an advisor. And advisors, because they do have a lot going on in the context of their responsibility as a fiduciary, they need to make sure that they're partnering with the right people to make sure that they are within compliance, whether it's cyber, privacy, data, or what have you.
Yeah, I mean, this is every advisory business is a technology business, whether or not they want to be. And that with that come all the ramifications of being in that business. And obviously, you're in the wealth management business and all the things that come within that. So we have to be really prudent with how we choose vendors, the underlying technologies those vendors are using, the policies and procedures they're using. Obviously, how we're ensuring and protecting our businesses with all that is imperative. But there's no going back. If you want to do meaningful work, if you want to continue to derive value for your customers, you have to invest in this stuff, but you have to do it well. We have to be really wise with how we make these decisions, how we press ahead.
Yeah. Well, Judd, some pushback here for a moment. It's not as if RIAs have the teams or the budget to be able to set up these guardrails. So what are some solutions where they can ensure that they're working with the right partner, right, and the right third-party vendors, and remaining within compliance, whether you're talking about GDPR, which is tends to be more strict than most of the jurisdictions within the US? How do you make those decisions when perhaps you're on a limited budget?
Yeah, I think there are ways to do this. Obviously, I'm biased in what we do here at Milemarker is we provide that solution in a turnkey sense to wealth management firms and broker dealers and even private equity companies that may invest in them, so that you're not dealing with setting this up from the start and building this infrastructure that may be overkill. But you have to be thinking about how do you buy, build, or partner, understanding those different options. But ultimately, the common denominator needs to be security and scale and actually realizing the value without inheriting unnecessary risk.
Right. Brian, what are some of the biggest mistakes advisors make when they're securing insurance, and what are some ways to avoid them?
Yeah, I think that there's absolute misperceptions around really what types of insurance do what, right? And so people put these put a lot of this under the heading of cyber insurance, or cybersecurity insurance. But then when you really talk down to the advisor and get into, okay, what is really the scenario you're wanting to insure against? Much of the time, there's data breach issues, but I would say that where we see some of the biggest claims is actually around money movement issues or wire fraud, social engineering sort of schemes and things. And in a general sense, a cyber liability policy will not cover direct funds transfer fraud issues. Now you can get the coverage, but you have to actually buy a crime or a fidelity based policy to get that social engineering wire fraud coverage. So there's just a lot of misperceptions and challenges in securing the right coverage for your business. And it really does, so much of it does come down to where we see the biggest claims are these money movement schemes that a fraudster is trying to get that advisor into the middle of that conversation or the transaction. And I think some of the other things are just the challenges in the language of these contracts. No two cyber insurers use the same lingo. It's not standardized. And so really having to slow down, one may call something cyber extortion and the other will call it ransomware as an example. So you go through a contract and you go, oh, I don't have ransomware coverage, but in fact you have cyber extortion coverage. So there's just not a real standardization going on in our industry in these policies. So you really have to slow down and read definitions and dig into the contracts themselves.
And then Brian, to be clear here, as well as I understand it, commercial insurance doesn't cover for cyber incidences either. So you need
Absolutely right. Yeah.
And this is a great point that you bring up in your notes, why insurance should not be seen as an expense. It should not be seen as a safety net. It should be part of the business asset because it's part of the model. If you don't have it and you can't operate as a business, you're not making money.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. And so seeing it as an asset, one dynamic is it's pre-tax dollars, right? It's an business expense that then can be used for something that's catastrophic. So that's one way that we look at it as well as an asset. The other component is that a lot of these cyber insurers are getting much better at providing some services that are pre-claim and even things like password managers and things like that to help their insurers, right? The insurers don't want to have the claims, right? And so if we can do some of these simple things, making sure that things like MFA are turned on and some of that in the underwriting to make risks actually better, make the RIs actually better businesses, your insurer actually wants to partner with you. So it's also an asset in that respect. And then finally, kind of in a third way, they're an asset that you're in cyber insurer. If you have a good quality one, they've seen a lot of this stuff, right? They've seen a lot of these scenarios that maybe it's brand new to you. It's the first time you've been through it, but they know, and they have the forensics teams and they have the response coaches really to kind of coach you through that matter and help you hopefully not make, two wrongs don't make a right, and kind of not take another step deeper into the mud when you have a live event.
Yeah. Jed, how can you maintain control while you're also partnering with the right third parties, with the right vendors to ensure that the security is there, but you also want to make sure that there's some element of control because it is your business at the end of the day. How do you help balance that out?
Yeah, the way to do that is really to partner with vendors that help you actually maintain greater control, and then all the specifications around what that control actually means. Who owns the data? Who's touching the data? Where does that data reside? How often is that data updated or rehydrated? And how is the security policy in place that's actually informing the governance around everything? Companies like ours are subject to audits constantly. We're constantly being audited. We're auditing ourselves in various factors, and I'm sure there's going to be new audits invented this year that we're going to implement. Things I don't even know, we need to have, but we will do it because that is stewardship of our clients, confidence, but also their security and in reality, so that we can take care of them and they can take care of their clients.
So it sounds as if you expect that there might be some evolution of the regulatory landscape shortly.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're in a different climate altogether around regulation. But I think if we were, knowing what we know, yes, there should be a greater evolution around regulation. Regulation should continue to evolve. Whether or not it does, that's outside of our jurisdiction, but we expect to have higher standards put upon us every day.
I would agree with you there. Brian, what happens if there is an incident with one of these firms or vendors or third party folks what happens if it impacts your business, but it wasn't necessarily a result of something internal or a piece of cyber framework or data governance that wasn't a result of, within the IRA itself, but it happened to one of the partners that the RIA was working with.
Oh, so like a breach at
Almost
a
like a third
vendor
party.
or something
Yeah.
like that, a third party. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's frequent, first off, and we absolutely, of course, we see that, right? And so in most cases, and it really gets down into what's the definition and coverage of computer system a lot of times that is covered for this sort of activity for an advisory firm. And generally, it should be any system used by that RIA firm or their staff, right? So therefore, when you're logging into a third-party provider in some way, whether it be your CRM or even email or something like that, if the breach was on that back end, your coverage needs to extend to that so that it responds from a breach standpoint, and that absolutely is obtainable. Now, so your insurer will work through it as if it's your loss. They will then, there's this fancy insurance word called subrogate. So if at the end of the day, the legal liability was not the RIA firm's legal liability, there was truly like a hard hack or a breach at that other vendor, your insurance company is going to go seek remedy from that other third party. But they're not, the important part in your contract is that your insurer doesn't get held up or deny the claim, because your clients don't care as an RIA, right? They don't care that it was, okay, you picked this other vendor. You need to respond to the issue. You need to shut it down. You need to do notification and very probably credit monitoring and some of these different things in that case. So really important that the definition of sort of computer system and whatever you're touching, that it extends to vendors as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Well,
good
because you
question.
think it will never happen to me. And then, of course, it does.
Yeah,
And at the end of the day, every company, whatever industry you're thinking about, the tech stack continues to grow. The
yeah,
third parties continue to grow. The attack space continues to grow. So it's, to your
yeah.
earlier point, it's not something that's nice to have or an expense. Your business model, your operating environment is dependent on understanding and having these frameworks in place.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Appreciate both of your insights. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thank you, Jeff.